this.
Okay, the Kingston Springs Regional Planning Commission meeting for June 13th is called to order. Roll call of voting members: Keith Alder.
Present.
Tony Campbell.
Here.
Tom Cullen.
Here.
Tony Gross.
Here.
Brian McCain.
Here.
Mike Padden here. Glenn Remick.
Here.
Chuck Slater.
Here.
Bob Soller. Here. Non-voting staff: Sharon Armstrong. Here. Planner John Lawless. Here. Manager and Jennifer Doe.
Martha Brooke here.
Martha Brooke Terry. Well, it says Jennifer. Okay, we have a quorum. Welcome to everybody here. I want to address you all for a minute. And I see you have, a number of you have taken the agenda. So there was a misprint in the Advocate. And it said that tonight we would be discussing the zoning for that land next to the storage place on Kingston Springs Road, right by the intersection. That's not on the agenda tonight. So I just wanted to make sure you all knew that. That will be at the City Commission meeting next Thursday here, okay? So if any of you were here just for that, I wanted you to know before we started the meeting and went forward. And at this time, is there anybody here who wanted to address the Planning Committee before we start? Or the Planning Committee before we start? Okay. Good. So, declare a quorum. You have the minutes from May 9th in front of you.
Move to approve the minutes.
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so the minutes are approved. You also have the Planning Commission agenda for today.
Move to approve.
I'm sorry, I hate to interrupt. I would like to add an item to the agenda, if I might.
Okay,
I would like to add an item about permitting process, please. And I would like to add an item for discussion of 3 cease and desist.
of what?
3 cease and desist.
3 cease
So
and
this would be
desist.
7 D and E.
That would be 7 D and E.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Or B.
Move to move as amended.
There's another amendment, I understand, under old business that provision has been withdrawn. Is that right for
That's
now?
correct. I received an email from Todd Smuts, Development PM at Thornton's LLC, indicating we wish to withdraw our application after further investigation of the visibility of proposed new sign location being blocked by trees. I apologize for the inconvenience and just heard this from our site yesterday.
As a
That would
note,
fall under.
I apologize again. As a note, even though the item under consideration is I would still like to have it on the agenda for the purpose of discussion.
Okay, all right.
John,
Did you want to go get a drink of water?
do we have any bottled water back
Yes,
there?
sir.
That'll choke me.
And do we not need to take item A and split it into the two separate issues?
We do.
So
But
really
they-
that should be item A and B.
That is correct.
So on old business, we should actually have the sign issue and the parcel issue as separate items. So that should be A, and then that should be B, where it's on the second line.
Okay,
So those would be separate issues. So
All
we
right.
need to amend it to have A and B there, and then A, B, C, D, and E for new business.
Okay, so do we have a motion to
So move.
All right. Seconded? We got a second? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, the agenda's approved. All right, so, under old business, Sharon, you said you wanted to discuss a couple points on that.
I do. In February of this year, Thornton's appeared before this planning commission and they were directed to file a plat to replace the plat that they use for the purposes of acquisition. They have not filed that plat. That plat was directed to be filed with an overlay of the development site because they are straddling 2 parcels for the purposes of development. That plat has not been filed. I've been in communication with Thornton several times this week and with their surveyor today. There appears to be some issue with the recorded data at the deeds office, so he's unable to secure what he needs in order to make the plat. So he supposes that he can resolve that. At one point, I pulled the property data for both of the parcels they acquired. One was still listed in the Dillard Group's name for the 4.33 acres. The 17 acres was listed for Thornton's. I went back 2 days later. They were both listed as Thornton's. I went back 2 days after that, and it reverted back. It was Dillard's and Thornton's. So there's some issue either with the deed going forward, the plat going forward. Something is not coming together for the surveyor to be able to obtain the legal information he needs for the plat. So they're attempting to resolve that. Until that occurs, right now, we don't know the actual footprint for the development. So at this point, I think a stop work order is in need until they can resolve the boundary issues. It's impossible for the building inspector to determine if they're staying within the footprint of the altered line for Lot 1 or not.
Is the whole
Inspection.
project,
Pardon?
the whole project? Okay, I'm just
The
questioning.
building inspections don't concern me, because the building it's sitting straddled two parcels, but building codes can still be inspected. But where there's excavating, where there's infrastructure being placed, we don't know if they're within the confines of Lot 1 or not until that plat is filed. It becomes the legal document. So the surveyor has an issue with clearing up what the confines of the property are. And until he cleans that up, he can't draw the moved divisional line for their development for Lot 1. So that's where we are with that.
That's pretty bad. That's the genesis of the project, so he should consolidate that a long time ago.
It came to planning's attention when they filed an application to relocate a sign. And in doing the research for the request to relocate the sign, I discovered the plat was not filed. That plat is our document that gives us the boundaries, so if I'm unable to determine if the relocation would still remain on Lot 1 or would move to Lot 2. If it moves to Lot 2, it would be an illegal sign because we don't allow off-premises advertising for businesses. So it becomes an issue for the sign, which they've withdrawn that request now as of today. But it becomes a bigger issue for the recording of the plat, because that's our footprint for the development. And it's the only one that we have. So the agreement that was reached with Thornton back in February is they would rescind the plat that was filed, replace it with the plat, with the development overlay. So
That they had presented to us. I'm sorry for interrupting, but what they had presented to us is what they were supposed to file. Right?
that's correct. It has not been filed.
Sorry for interrupting.
And we had a pretty lengthy conversation about them filing that in that meeting as well,
Right.
so.
So, can you, again, say, talking about a stop work order, what you're proposing?
I am proposing that we issue a stop work order from a zoning perspective for the land disturbance because we're unable to determine the footprint that they're in. The building itself is not an issue, but the parcel next door contains a great deal of flood area. So the redesigned plat that they presented here in February does not contain flood areas. So we're trying to straddle regulatory lines here on a development without a measurement to go by.
So in essence, what it boils down to is they'll be able to continue work on the building,
Yes.
but they can't do any more site work in essence or any.
That's correct. Anything on the, as I'm facing the exterior front of the building on the right-hand side, we're unable to determine where that disturbance is occurring.
All right.
They were doing excavation on the left-hand side as you face it up near the road.
They can. They're in the process, as I drive by when I come through and look at our larger developments, when I come to planning commission meetings, the left-hand side appears to be where they're laying water lines, electricity, that sort of thing, and that's on that boundary, so we're able to determine on that side. But on the right-hand side with the greater excavation and filling and rock breaking is going on, and we're unable to determine that line until they file a plan.
Wait, not much going on the right-hand side. Most everything that's being done
There
is on
isn't
the
a
left.
property.
There is in the back though.
The original,
They're making
to clarify
various
that,
water and everything else.
to clarify that observation, Mr. Campbell, the parcel that was acquired originally on the left side was 4.33 acres.
Right, that was part of
The
it.
site that they're developing is 8.69 acres, so we're unable to see.
Okay, I'm just trying to understand. I mean, they're obviously working the access road to the back on the left-hand side.
And you said that that smaller parcel at one time was registered to Dillard, then it went to Thornton's, now it's back to Dillard.
That's correct.
Can you tell us why?
Not on a deed transfer. This is the property record for the tax assessor. And part of the issue for us is a taxation issue for them. You know, it's still being taxed as Dillard's. It's still being listed as Dillard's ownership rather than Thornton's. But the deed has a recorded stamp on it. So the surveyor is unable to determine where the acquisition lies legally in order to create the plat. And Mr. McCain may be able to give you some insight on that. The first thing that a surveyor does is pulls the deed.
Should do.
You tie the property down first, that's the first thing you do. And then everything else can be built out based on that. I don't know how many years this has been going on, but if he hadn't tied it down by now, he's not going to.
So
He didn't purchase it until about 3 months ago, did he?
the deed's in your packet. So I didn't really check the date of the deed, but I can now. It appears that it was acquired the 10th day of December 2018 for the 17-acre tract. And the special warranty deed for the second one, the 4.33 acres, 10th day of December 2018. If you'll think back to the Planning Commission meeting in February of this month, that was one of the first questions that was asked of them: have you acquired the property? Because that was the purpose of allowing them to record that present deed, or the present plat that's on file now.
That warranty deed, I think, says this is an unimproved property located at the northwest corner of the intersection of Lebanon Hills Road and Interstate 40. This is the northeast corner.
17 acres, which was originally parcel 59.
I'm saying the northwest versus northeast. It says northwest corner. The deed does.
That may
Second page.
be part of the issue with,
I mean, Hartford and Roberts did an Alta in 2017. It's been tied down since then.
HDR Design in Nashville furnished the first deed, the second, or the first plat, second plat with the overlay. So I don't know what's changed since they furnished those to the Planning Commission in February, and the first one was in November of the previous year to now. And that was all the information that I was given from the call. So the issue at hand is that there's an outstanding requirement from this Planning Commission for that plat to be filed with the development overlay in order to establish the confines of the development.
Just as a procedural matter, if we're going to vote on doing the stop work on it, would we want to do that now or down as item E where we have stop work as an added item, correct?
Yes, this is informational only. It would go to item E.
To item E, okay. Also, because this was split into two things, is there anything to be said about the, I mean, it's withdrawn, but anything to be said about the signage?
The signage itself, as you remember, was somewhat of a contentious issue for the planning commission and Thornton's. The signage was eventually approved. The relocation of that sign, my concern is that we don't know where it's going. So they withdrew that. And they withdrew that because of, I'm assuming, the plating issue. So it may reappear at some point in the future. I have no way of knowing that. But at this point, they just decided to withdraw.
Okay, anything else on number 6, old business? Okay. Moving on to new business. Plat revision, lot combined, all good, 19 and 20 Founders Lane. We have recusal here, I guess. So, now Brian, did you do the survey on
Two.
that? Okay. All right.
We still have a quorum.
Yeah,
Good
we
thing
still have
everybody's
one.
still here.
Okay. Sharon, did you want to comment on that?
There's very little to comment on. This is a combination of 2 lots. They're combining them, not subdividing them, so it's a revision to an existing platted subdivision within the golf club. It meets all of your regulations. I reviewed it. Everything is furnished. We were furnished. Did you distribute those?
Yes.
Copies. You have a copy in it. The only thing lacking on the first review was the soil grid. Those are required by the Department of Environment Conservation. That was added. It now meets all the regulations and actually makes the lot larger rather than smaller.
I have a deed for both lots.
Okay. Do we have a motion on the plat revision to combine the lots?
Motion to combine these 2 lots.
Second.
Okay. Any discussion? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
All right, so the motion's approved to combine the lots, item A on the new business. Item B, plat revision lot combined LRD, 115 Lyman Hills Road, map 96K, parcel 24. Map 96K, parcel 24.
With the rebuilding of the BP, at one point, the El Jardin restaurant and the BP location had some shared parking. They allowed overflow parking there. When the BP went under reconstruction, they informed El Jardins that they would no longer have access to that ancillary parking next door. The El Jardin owner acquired the lot adjacent to the restaurant. We reviewed their request for resolution to their issue for parking, advised them that because this was a change to their site plan, they wanted to combine the 2 lots, which is the first operation. We can't approve any development on it until we consider combining the 2 lots. They've combined them together so that they can accommodate the number of spaces that they need in order to comply with their original site plan, and they filed a subsequent site plan reflecting those parking spaces. So you will hear this as 2 separate items. The first is the consideration of combining the 2 lots together, because we don't allow shared parking unless it's a commercial complex, and that has to be specifically designated by the Planning Commission. So your first consideration is combining the 2 lots together for the commercial building. It was a commercial project. And then your second consideration is the site plan, which has been reviewed and meets all requirements.
In the site plan, it's simply looking at that combined 2 lots. Because other than the parking, there's no other improvement. There's no other
There
building.
is a commercial building there that was occupied by a CPA. We don't have any restrictions on the number of commercial buildings that we
Okay.
can place. So that location, when we reviewed the site plan and the parking arrangements, we also reminded them that that location would require parking as well because it is a separate structure. So in submitting their site plan, they complied with parking regulations for the restaurant itself, and they complied with parking regulations for the separate structure as well.
they're not gonna tear down the second building?
It is my understanding from speaking to the owner that they have plans to do so in the future, but for the purposes of this, they needed parking for the restaurant. They have no other access to parking at this point, so.
Would the driveway to Crouches then be ceased?
I don't think that that's a legal driveway to Crouches, but
Yeah, how, I mean, it's existing, but
The driveway itself is reflected on the new site plan that you have. You're allowed to use, you can access as many structures as you want in a commercial complex or in a single driveway. We don't restrict that at all. That's the whole goal of a commercial complex. Let's say it's a strip mall. You don't want a driveway for every single business because that
Correct.
complicates traffic.
okay.
Okay, so would these be two separate motions, do you believe?
Yes, you will need a motion to consider combining
The lots.
the lots, and then a motion to consider the site plan as submitted.
Okay.
I have to abstain from both.
Pardon?
I have to abstain from both.
Mr. Recuse himself again.
Recuse myself from both.
Okay. So Brian's still recused, Keith is no longer recused. Okay.
you got a quorum.
So we have to set up a quorum. Do we have a motion on combining the two lots for LRB?
So moved.
Second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, any opposed? Okay, the motion passes. And regarding the site plan, agreeing to the site plan, as it's presented in here, do we have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that motion passes as well for the site plan.
As a training moment for the planning commission, this is an existing business, and it's insulated by several state statutes for expansion. So we can require the changes from the site plan perspective, and we can review the combination of the two lots for a plat, but we are prohibited by state statute from forbidding a business to expand, which includes the parking as well. So the state legislature, in their eminent wisdom, decided to insulate existing businesses in that fashion.
As they often do.
It looks like they're really going to pave a bunch of that bare ground behind the restaurant before you get to Crouches, which is now nothing but a series of potholes.
Yeah.
It's probably 50 by 50 anyway.
And they have a telephone pole to remove too.
Okay. So moving on to item C, the concept discussion of the Ellerslie subdivision.
This one is going to require us to go back a few years. 2007 is when this project first came to the city for approval. At that time, a PUD was overlaid over it. Phase 1 was reviewed and approved for construction, and on your plan, that would be the numbered lots that are in green still. That development plan had an expiration deadline of 2 years. So that plan is almost completed. There are still permits that are being done. Buildings are still being constructed. The development agreement, the PUD agreement, the HOA, and all of the other pertinent documents reside solely with Phase 1. Any questions on that? So what you have before you for the places in yellow, and no one's asking for any approval tonight, this is simply a heads up and a concept discussion. So the yellow lots,
We don't have color.
we're gonna pass it
The
around.
light gray.
The yellow
Well, hold it
lots,
up. That-
White
that'll
and
work.
yellow.
the yellow lots are the ones, he has an extra copy too, are the ones are the proposed Phase 2 and 3 lots. So for the planning commission, this starts a process where the development plan is going to have to be drafted. HOA will have to be drafted. Phase 2 and 3, in whichever order they want to submit it, will have to be submitted with technical drawings, with infrastructure, with all of that to be done, because it's, Phase 1 exists in and of its own. This starts it over again for the development. So I think that we have Mr. Myrtle here tonight, and the engineers joining him, and the engineering firm is joining him tonight in order to relay to you what their idea for completing and expanding this project is. John, we didn't have the original file for that. We probably, at the next meeting, that would probably be a helpful thing. That would be helpful for the next meeting. I don't think we're not voting or anything tonight. But on the Mylar, just as a reminder, there is a notation about slopes. The ground for Phase 2 is a little more challenging than it is for Phase 1. So there's a notation on the plat itself about slopes. We had a meeting with the owner-developer, Mr. Myrtle, and his engineering team 3 weeks ago, where we kind of laid out the process for submitting this development. And we also noted that the steep slope would present some challenges for runoff, also for soil erosion, and also for foundations for the buildings. So they're well aware that those items will need to be addressed with the Planning Commission. So with that, I'll just turn it over to them.
Do I stand right here? Anywhere? Good evening, Ryan Lovelace. I'm with Civil Site Design Group. We're the civil engineers and the land planners on the project. We're in Nashville. I know Ron is, who's the developer and the owner of the property, is excited to move into Phase 2 and 3. Phase 1, if you've not been by there, has been under construction, like you said, since '06, I think it is. Slow going. I mean, the recession hit. I mean, it hurt everything. And finally, if you've not been out there, there's some holes being built again. And I would say it's probably about half done. So we're fortunately wanting to move into Phase 2 and 3. And just really show you what we're wanting to do. I think it's another, I think I said 35 lots or 38 lots, whatever's in yellow there. The original plan was 31 lots, if you look at the numbers. So it's just another half of the project. I believe the old plan from '06 showed all the phases, but of course time has changed things on the PUD and approvals and all that. So again, just want to move into the next phases of this project. We'll look at the slopes. We'll get a slope plan together, utility plan together. And really just here tonight, before we actually put a lot of time and effort into the next set of plans, a concept plan, I guess it is. We just wanted to hear if there's anything you could provide to us, any concerns, anything you want to tell us before we submit this to you. We'll submit it next month, and so it'll be on the August agenda. Here to answer any questions too. Thank you.
From the planning perspective, as I've explained to the Planning Commission, I have concerns about slope. The building inspector expressed those as well. So those are things that we will look at when the plan is submitted. The original plan, although there was a master layout for Phase 2 and 3, that has long dropped by the wayside because there was a 2-year timeline on the development. So this project is being submitted even though it's within a current development as a brand new project. So everything will have to be vetted exactly that way. The next step for them is to submit a more defined concept to address slope, to get a grading plan, to explain how they're going to contain the runoff and deal with the steep slopes on the property. And that's something that we routinely work through with the developer as we go along. They send things and we look at them and review them and see if that's workable. My advice to the applicant would be to try to get a concept plan pulled together with a general layout, taking into account contours, drainage calculations. Submit that first before they do an entire plan set, because it's very expensive to have them all drawn. And let us review that, get comments back to them, bring it before the Planning Commission, see if you have any input, and then proceed on from there. That way they're not expending a huge amount of money. And then they will have to, Martha, Brooke, and Jennifer and I will coordinate on putting together the development plan as we did with phase one for the improvements and that sort of thing once it gets past concept stage.
Any questions?
So we have, they just wanted to let you know where they were on the project.
It looks good. It's becoming more popular.
How many houses are out there now?
What do you say, 15 houses probably out there right now? How many homes are out there right now?
14 built, 5 under construction.
14 built, 5 under construction.
You can ask Ron, he'll know all of my concerns, because I've been dealing with him for a long time.
Okay. All right, well,
Thank
thank you
you.
very much.
Appreciate it.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Have a good evening.
Thank you. That's easy.
All right, so we have 2 more items under new business. Items D and E. One was the stop work, but what was D? What was the first one? We have
Item
two
D.
items to add. Proposals for building permit, process for building permits.
I would like to propose that the planning commission adopt as a formal process a building permit submission and review. We are required by the ordinance to submit things 30 days in advance of a planning commission meeting, so that it gives everybody sufficient time to review them. The process worked fairly well for a while. There have been some changes in that process, but the process should be submission of any permit application or process for development or application for development for zoning review first. That way it gets vetted for the zoning compliance, it gets vetted for floodplain management compliance, it gets vetted for any slope issues, any runoff issues. Those sorts of things get done first, because that's the first question that needs to be asked, is are we in compliance with zoning? Once that is done, it should then be sent forward, if it's a building permit application, to the building inspector, because the building inspector is not trained to look for the zoning things. So zoning compliance will become a prevalent issue fairly quickly if the permits are not reviewed for that. So I would like to propose that the permits come to planning first, go from planning to the building department. If there's even something as simple as a deck, you would not think would be an issue, but it is. If that deck encroaches on a setback, or it exceeds the lot coverage for your zoning district, or if the deck is in an area that is otherwise excluded, like a flood area, or it's a blue line stream, there's a number of things that need to be looked at from a zoning compliance perspective before the permit to build is ever considered. So that is the process that I would like to establish to make sure that we're catching everything up front rather than catching it later. And then from there, it would go to the building inspector for the permit review for the appurtenances of building, the structure, that sort of thing. So that's the process that I would like to see established. I would like to see that process put in writing. I would like to see that process to occur every single time, because the documentation, as you know, it's not a problem until it's a problem. If somebody challenges us and we haven't documented our files, it brings about issues. Sometimes difficult to resolve. So that is what I would like to see happen.
That's a great idea. That's what Williamson County does. They do a zoning certificate first.
I'm sorry, Brian,
That's what Williamson County does. They do a zoning certificate first before they do anything.
I would like to see those applications come forward and get their zoning clearance before building permits are considered, because sometimes you can comply with the building code and be out of compliance with zoning.
Okay, what do we need to do? Need to pass a resolution stating what?
You're effectively requesting an amendment to your ordinance. And so So we would need to get that in place. You all would need to approve that, and then it would go before the board for 2 readings.
Well, then I'll make a motion requesting that that amendment be drafted.
So in the process of this amendment, though, right now, under the ordinance, does it not say that the building inspector is responsible for doing this? Do we need, that language would also need to be changed?
Does, and that was my next item for discussion,
Okay.
is that the zoning ordinance currently says that your building inspector is the zoning administrator. And in some jurisdictions, that may be appropriate because the building official is trained in planning and zoning. In this jurisdiction, that is not the case. So, for a really long time, the planner administrated your ordinance. In other words, your planner's the one who checks to make sure you have zoning compliance. That's what I do every day. So I would like to amend that section of the zoning ordinance to state that the administration of the zoning lies with the planner or the planning commission, one or the other, rather than the building inspector. And the permitting process for building lies with the building inspector. And that way, we are then able to create that set of process rules and resolutions.
Okay, so when you said with the planner or with the planning commission, in my mind, planning commission, you know, we're meeting once a month and you have to submit 30 days before the meeting. So that's I'm trying to follow along here, but that's a longer process than if you are reviewing it.
You could probably set it up as lies with the planning commission or their designee, and then you could by resolution designate whomever to be your designee
that.
for the zoning.
For zoning.
Right. So that should, you know, years down the road, we bring it all in-house and we have one person that serves in both realms, then rather than having to amend the ordinance again, we can just amend the resolution or sign a new resolution appointing somebody else as your designee.
Do I have a proper amendment on the floor here, or a motion to
So,
have you draft the amendment?
I believe it could be the same.
Right.
It could be the same amendment. So all we're doing is we're making a process where if someone applies for, or a permit application comes in, it goes to the planner reviews it for zoning. Once she's cleared for zoning, it goes to the building inspector. The building inspector then either approves or declines the permit.
As much as we do, I just want to formalize that process so that if there's a challenge to it,
Okay.
it's in
So
line.
it just gives us a process for how that paper will move.
For the paper, but
Planner.
not being submitted 30 days ahead of a planning commission, and the planning commission approving all permits.
That would be different. That would be different. That would be a different issue.
I don't want any change to that 30-day restriction. On small projects, we may not need 30 days. But when you get a plan set for Thornton's or the BP,
Sure.
those are dense, many pages, have to pass through many hands, it has to look at stormwater, it has to look at a number of things. So that 30-day process needs to remain in place. I have found that in my career, if I hurriedly look at something, I may not catch everything. So I want to make sure that process stays exactly where it is.
Okay.
30 days before the planning commission meeting, it has to be submitted for the planning commission. That means staff review is already done. I have found that jurisdictions that shorten that time, there's mistakes made, vetting's not done, permits are issued, or shouldn't be issued.
So,
Is it same thing for a deck?
Pardon?
You said you're talking about a deck, building a deck on your house or something earlier. We're going to take the same process for that as we do commercial?
No.
Okay.
If it's zoning compliant, it doesn't require planning commission action, which a deck permit does not. It goes right on
Just
to the
the
building
design.
inspector.
okay.
But this would require, from now on, when someone does a deck, that it would first go to the planner
Right.
for just the zoning approval.
Right.
Okay.
So they don't
So-
have to wait, submit it 30 days beforehand before they can build a deck.
Before
No.
they, okay. I was trying to follow that. So, 3 years ago, I had my kitchen remodeled. I had to pull a permit.
Right.
So that would go to you first.
One-day turnaround.
Okay.
When I get them, all I do is pull up the zoning, I look
Okay.
at setbacks,
All
I
right.
look at your plan. If it's inside the footprint of your house,
Then-
out of my
Okay.
jurisdiction.
Good.
But that zoning compliance attachment on that permit gets completed so that if you as the property owner ever want to sell your house, you have zoning compliance.
Okay.
So,
Thank you. So Tony Campbell made a motion.
Tony made a motion.
I made a motion.
Can he restate the motion?
That you draft the amendment
To fix it.
to fix it for review by the planning commission.
The technical language of to fix
To
it.
require, I think the proper form of the motion would be a resolution requesting council to draft an ordinance for your review to amend the current building permit application process to require a zoning certificate first, and then to have the administration of the zoning law with the planning commission or their designee.
Did you get that, John?
That was where it's
Beautifully done.
And who seconded that?
Very good job. I did.
Okay, all right. Any more discussion on this motion? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the motion passes to draft. And the last one was the stop work. The last item was the stop work.
Yes,
Me?
a couple of them. For the BP, we have had, as I said, several meetings with them, relayed the directions for their project out in writing, both John, the building inspector, and I. We've had a conference call, we've had multiple discussions, we've reviewed multiple emails. They have not submitted the documents for the petitioned area of the building. The building permit file reveals that the permit was issued on 2,500 square feet on a 4,600 square foot building. That kind of gave me cause for pause once I discovered that the building permit was issued. Regardless of what they put on the inside of that building, it's a 4,600 square foot building. So fees were only charged and calculated for 2,500 square feet. Secondarily, it was not submitted for zoning review, planning commission review, when the building was partitioned into two spaces.
Did anybody know that?
I did not. My heads up came on a Facebook page.
When it initially came before the planning commission and the design review, it was laid out as two separate
They brought up in the planning commission, John, that they were thinking about it, but they never brought to the planning commission anything other than the stop.
The use that was approved and the application that was presented to the planning commission, and I reviewed my notes today very carefully, and the review. They wanted to replace the convenience store that was there at the gas station. That's what was presented, that's what was on the site plan, that's what you reviewed, that's what you approved. The use is allowable within the zone. The issue that we have is that the requirements for a convenience store, parking, landscaping, lighting, all of those things are different for a convenience store than they are for a restaurant. So if their intent is to co-locate a convenience store and a restaurant in the same building, then there are requirements from the health department for hood suppression, for the sprinkler, that are different for the restaurant from the fire code's perspective and the building code perspective than there are for the convenience store. So it's a change in the use of an approved site plan, set of building plans, and structure. So we've relayed to them the things that they need to provide. I was a little surprised that the building permit was issued without standing comments, but it was. And the building permit was only issued for a portion of the building square footage, but yet the entire outside perimeter of the building is there. So that's kind of one of the things I was trying to address in the previous item process, and keeping the process within the confines of the regulations. So for them, at this juncture, they have submitted an application for signage. I can't review the application for signage because their intent is to open another business in the other side of the building, which will also require signage. They have to choose a path. Do they want to be considered a single commercial development, which limits their signage to a particular square footage, or do they want to be considered a commercial complex, which is two businesses that locate side by side, much like the rows here, where they're each allowed a little additional signage, right? So that decision was presented to them several weeks ago, don't have an answer. We also still have some outstanding requirements from the building inspector for the convenience store side that haven't been addressed. And we don't have a set of plans for the build out for the other side. So we're at a juncture where I don't want to interrupt their process. I really don't. I've tried every way I know to avoid that. But at a certain point, when you've exceeded the boundaries that you're allowed to use, while your competitor is across the road watching every single step you make, we have to draw a line somewhere. I'm asking for direction from you where that line's going to be. So we are in kind of unfamiliar territory for me. I'm not used to the scenario.
You know, I've always been pretty obvious that I think we ought to go by the book and require that they do just exactly what we require of anybody else. I've been concerned about where are they gonna put parking for that restaurant? I don't think there's enough land there to have it.
That's one of the questions. An additional requirement that will come with the location of a restaurant is a traffic study. They exceed the limits of not having a traffic study. So there are all of these documents and things, and I don't want to ever encourage forgiveness rather than permission from a permitting or review perspective, because it starts a culture that spreads really well. So from my perspective, we've asked for the documents that we need, both sides of their commercial house, the convenience store and the restaurant side. And we received the sprinkler plan for the convenience store, but it was furnished, I think, last week, 10 days ago. It should have been acquired before the permit was issued, along with every other outstanding requirement.
Well, does the sprinkler plan cover the whole building or
No.
just the
It's
convenience?
just, which puts us in a quandary. How do you inspect the plumbing? How do you do all those things? Do you just put a stop where the wall is and not sprinkle the rest of the building? And then we have the permit fees, which are an issue. These were collected on 2,500 square feet of a 4,600 square foot building. But they built the entire building from the outside.
So the proprietor is fully aware of what documentation they need to provide.
They are. That's been done. I went back and reviewed all of the information. We have done that in writing on several occasions. The building plans were reviewed for the convenience store side of the building and had outstanding comments, some of which still have not been addressed. So that's kind of my concern, is that when we put the cart ahead of the horse, it never works well. It just doesn't. So now we're in the middle of a development where things have taken place and we don't quite know how to proceed or where to go. And the only way to do it is just to stop it until they provide what they're required to provide. So I had a conversation with the owner. It was a lengthy conversation yesterday where he said, I don't want to worry about the other side of the building right now. I'll worry about it at a later date. We have to worry about the other side of the building. We don't have a choice. So I would like to rectify the permit first, acquire the documents that we need in order to move forward. And until those are supplied, I'm reluctant to allow them to put anything on their property because of parking, because of landscaping, because of lighting, because of signage, because of runoff, because of a number of things. I don't see how we can proceed until we have the documents we need, because we have no.
Do you need a motion then to stop them?
Yes, sir.
A motion requesting the building inspector to issue a stop work order.
Well, this is a zoning
You said
issue,
you said there were also other things that they
There
had
are,
not
that the
supplied with
building-
respect to the original.
but it would be a non-compliance both from zoning perspective.
I'll make a motion that we ask the building commissioner to put a stop work order on from his standpoint, and that I guess the city manager or the planner to put a stop work order on them from the other side of the issue. I want someone to look to see if the access to the property behind them is still there.
If I might, the zoning non-compliance stop is a planning commission action. They're exceeding your approved scope. So the building official inspector can issue it, but the zoning compliance resides here.
So what's the proper motion?
Yes.
Stop
Yes,
before
you're
we get
requesting
the
from the
documentation she can review.
From the planning commission perspective, they failed to submit several things for the convenience store side and.
They did indicate there was something else that the building inspector had been requesting with respect to construction of the building.
Yes.
So I think it's a good idea to ask for both reasons.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I concur with the city attorney. We need a stop issue, and I don't know if we were clear enough, from the building perspective, building permit perspective, and the zoning perspective. Because that's the only way that we're gonna be able to, to get one.
So they.
What is the proper?
Yeah, so I think Tony just wants to know how to phrase it essentially, because I think he did it pretty much.
Properly,
I
'cause he
think
said,
it
yeah,
phrased
I think
it
you've got it properly. I just want to make sure everybody was on the same page as to what, why we were doing it.
It's on YouTube. It's on YouTube.
Okay, so the motion was for the building commissioner to issue a stop work order.
Building inspector.
Building inspector to issue a stop work order
So.
for,
With respect to the deficiencies on their zoning, the deficiencies with respect to the planning they've submitted to the planning commission, and the deficiencies with respect to what they owe to the building code.
okay, building code and separately zoning.
Is that correct?
So is it a qualifier you put on there until resolved, or is it?
Until the proper
until it's-
paperwork is provided.
It just, yeah.
Yeah.
The
you get that,
stop
John?
work will have an attachment of the previous things that we relayed to them in writing. We always attach that to anything, so that until those are submitted.
Just out of
Submitted.
curiosity.
Submitted, that staff
Reviewed
is satisfied that those are
That's
submitted,
correct.
right, as required?
That's correct.
Okay.
Just out of curiosity, what was the explanation for getting to this point from the builder?
I did not review the permit. So that the question,
So they felt they were doing what was permitted?
they did receive a permit, but that permit was not cleared through zoning.
Okay.
The permit was issued, but the permit was issued for part of the structure.
Right.
And it was issued in spite of outstanding building code or requirements that were not met, and outside of zoning requirements that were not met. And in addition to that, the building's been petitioned for use that has not been approved by the planning commission. So if I were going to approach a development in the wrong way, this would be a good training model for that.
Okay, so do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, any further discussion on this motion? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so that motion for the stop work on the BP. All
Yes,
right,
sir.
so
Then
that
we
passed.
have one more.
Really so simple.
Unfortunately. We talked about Mr. McPherson's property up next to the storage buildings quickly.
We actually theoretically have two more, correct? Because we
Because
still
we have
haven't
one
gone
on-
to Thornton's yet.
The Thornton's going to, that one, if you don't mind, we'll hold till last because we have a clean understanding of it. On the McPherson property, we went through a long protracted period to get to where we are today. In meeting with them, we laid out very clear steps about what they needed to do. They received a grading permit, began excavating according to the geotechnical report. Somewhere along the way, they got the impression that they were then allowed to fill compact. There has been absolutely no permit issues with them to fill in compact, so they have filled and compacted all of phase 2. They have excavated everything off of phase 1. So the ground rules were, you excavate the fill, sort the suitable fill from the unsuitable fill, call for an inspection, furnish the haul tickets so that we know that you disposed of the unsuitable fill in a suitable landfill rather than depositing it somewhere else. Then at that point, you apply for a permit to install the clean fill in the compaction process. Somewhere in the process, The contractor relayed to the owner that they had permission and approval to install the fill and compact, which they don't. On the site visit that the city manager and I did in May, we relayed to the contractor in very plain English, as politely as I'm capable of doing it, what the steps were. It's hard to say a blunt thing, and I mean, I can put it on a pink note, but you know, it's still gonna be the same information. Remove, call, furnish tickets, call for an inspection. Those are the instructions. We also relayed to him that when the fill was installed and compacted, that we would require an independent firm to inspect it to ensure that nothing unsuitable fill was being installed on the property. That has not taken place. They have moved forward. So I want to issue a cease for that activity, which is again a zoning violation and a stormwater violation, until they come in, we sit down, we have a meeting, we have the core drills done so that we know what's in the ground. The bulk of the fill that was not suitable came from the Nashville Fairgrounds. And it's really old concrete. And the binding agent back in the day was asbestos, and the epoxy mix contained formaldehyde. And I see Mr. McCain nodding his head over there. We have a blue lime stream below the area of the fill. So when it rains, it's washing this material towards the water, which then gets us cleanly into TDAC territory, and it is impossible to remove asbestos from water. The process to do that from your drinking water is exorbitantly expensive. So it's important that we stop it now, get the core drills done by an independent firm to determine that there's not any unsuitable material deposited in the layers and layers and layers of fill that have been installed.
So what motion do you need?
I need a motion for a cease for violation of the Planning Commission order for the remediation of the property for the notice of violation.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion on that motion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so that motion carried. Last one is...
Last item is Thornton's. I have requested that we issue a cease for the area of the property that exceeds the original lot 1 that they acquired, the 4.33. The building part of it, I don't have heartburn with. But as they start to move dirt to fill and compact, and it's a 6.89 acre development on an 8.64 acre tract, so I can't tell where they are until they file the required plat with the development overlay so we can establish the area. There's been a lot of dirt moving, a lot of rock ramming, a lot of activity on that lot. And on the side towards the interstate, I have concerns about where the flood line is, and I have concerns about where the blue line is, and I have concerns about the disturbed area exceeding the boundaries of lot 1, which technically doesn't exist at this point.
Okay.
So I want to issue a cease for everything that exceeds the original 4.33 acres, with the exception of the building.
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so that motion carried. Is there anything else?
Yeah.
Just a date for the next planning and zoning community meeting. I would like for us to try to nail down a date pretty quickly while it's fresh on people's minds. Secondarily, this particular community outreach it will be much more in-depth about the planning and permitting process. I want people to understand what ground rules are. you're real popular with folks right now. I get calls every day for people wanting to develop. So you're attracting the bees. We want to make sure you don't get stung. But that, and then I want to move forward with planning. And I would really like for the city to consider, and I've made this suggestion probably 5 or 6 times over the last 10 years. You are ripe for a comprehensive plan that embraces everything. Because if you don't, and we continue to permit things piecemeal without considering infrastructure, economic development, housing, all of those things together, we're going to continue to build out until we don't have any suitable property left, because you have geographic limitations, floodplain limitations, slope limitations, you have a lot of limitations. So you have very little land, and it behooves the planning commission to think about maximizing the development of what you have available to you.
So you're talking about another, one of the meetings that we had, the first informational.
Right, but this one I will conduct, and it will be specifically about many of the topics that we talked about tonight.
Okay. So do you guys have some proposed dates that you want to talk about now?
I would like to propose that we don't have it on Thursday. That seems to be an issue for a number of people that I've heard from recently. Most people say that Tuesdays are probably easier for them. So if we could schedule on Tuesdays, Saturdays tend to be soccer, baseball, those kinds of things. So on available Tuesday, sometime pretty soon, I would like to, and I will send some proposed dates, and we can consider it at our next planning commission meeting and establish a firm date so that we can get the advertising and everything out. And lastly, advertising. There are specific ground rules for advertising meetings, and I want to make sure we're hitting them. So when Facebook is a great outreach, but we need to advertise our meetings in whatever organ, which is the legal term for the newspaper that you use, and we need to do it with the agenda intact. And we need to get to a point where we're not amending agendas midstream, where we know what's coming and it's coming in sufficient time. I guess what I'm really saying is we really need to slow down the process, because things are occurring out of order, they're occurring without proper vetting, and we need to make sure that with the advertising, when the public comes, they know what they're coming for, so they have time to review and respond. So it's just a little thing to stick in your hat to make sure that advertising becomes standardized.
Everybody think about it, we'll set the time at the next meeting. I'd like to make one last comment. I want to commend John for conducting, he's not even listening.
Yes, sir.
I'm over here trying to commend you
Oh, I can
for the meeting the other night. I thought it was, you did a good job, and it was well done.
Good man.
I agree.
Did a really good job.
I'm over the adjourned.
Okay, we have a second?
Second.
All right.
Some eloquent move.
Anybody opposed to adjourn? Meeting adjourned.